Hey everyone, welcome back. And I think we're going to call this episode Pandora's Boxes because I was just going to make a short little intermediate video for you guys introducing you to different Egyptian sarcophagi, and it kind of snowballed out of control. So this might be a little bit longer of a video. Before we start, I have some news updates for you guys. First, Ben over at Uncharted X. Now, you guys probably know Ben from Puka J Productions. He is one half of Puka J. Luke over at Enigmas of the Ancient World being the other half. Well, Ben has decided to start his own channel. So now we have each of their independent views, and then we also are going to have the Puka J channel for perhaps collaboration videos and maybe some streams between different researchers. That sounds like a great idea. I really like the direction that they're going to take that. So everyone, please go subscribe to Ben. He's already got some videos up, some good interviews, and you can see he's already got more subscribers than me, which is really good. I'm glad to see that. Let's try to get him over 1,000. Next, Megalithic Maiden. This is JJ Ainsworth, and you may have seen her in some of the Megalithomania videos, Hugh Newman's videos. She's been going around with him and other people exploring the Cyclopean walls here and some of the more polygonal constructions. So she's going to be a good resource. Keep an eye out for her. She's obviously off to a good start and has a lot of places on here already. Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe, Egypt. Yeah, this is going to be great. Definitely check out her stuff. Next, I've added a new channel to my saved channels, Ombio Productions. Now, I've kind of seen these videos in passing before, and I never really stopped and went through them to see what kind of footage they contained. These are really amazing, guys. These show a lot of the processing marks in the South American stone sites, and even go over some of the Nazca lines, different things. Very, very good footage in here. Highly recommend this one and this one. These two have very good footage, and also, yes, this one I've saved to the saved playlist, The Living Stones of Sacsayhuaman. So I'll probably add this one as well. But yeah, this one shows all the really anomalous marks in the stone. It looks almost like a soldering iron going through plastic, like melting, like everyone says, like Brian Forster and others have proposed before me. But this has some of the best footage I've seen so far, some of the most detailed footage. And the reason why I bring that particular channel up is because Justin Welgemode and I were having a really good conversation on the Qasr El Saga video, and we were discussing some of these scoop marks and weird processing marks. So that led me to create a new album, Scoop Marks. So some really interesting stuff in here. It's really early on. I have a lot more to add, but I'm trying to go off memory here at first and just pick out all the ones that I can remember. If you guys have any more, please shoot them my way. But we're going to try to find all these instances, like this one from the Ombio video, that thumbnail. This, I believe, is the same kind of processing. Ziggy Dan pointed out this up here. This is horizontal, whatever that is, and there may be some striations above it. Who knows what that's about? But then, of course, what is this whole gate about with its large step that has a smaller step, obvious secondary step, and all these nubs and random, what appear to be random places down here? They could be for lifting, I'll admit. Some of them have good leverage points for lifting, but they're just some of them other ones in odd places, and why would you need one way down here? Very, very weird, right? They some of the guys, Shermanator and Ziggy Dan, mentioned it looks kind of industrial. I think it does, like a dock, something like that, possibly. But a lot of interesting stuff that we need to put in this album. And also, I have put some more pictures in the Wedge Holes album. This one is still also very in progress, and I'm not even sure what I'm proposing in this album. But I'm just trying to point out interesting examples of what would orthodoxly be called, traditionally be called wedge holes. And here is the Khafre pyramid base. Does anyone tell you that there's granite casing stones at the base of the Khafre pyramid? I was talking about this with Charles Koss and Matt at Ancient Architects. This is a rare instance. There's not much of it left, and it's obviously a different surface treatment than the Menkaure pyramid, but I just find some of these to be very interesting in their placement, their arrangement. When they're broken away, you see that they're kind of squared off. Each one is kind of squared off. Just an interesting way to make a wedge hole. I have lots of different examples in here of very strange processing marks. We could call these scoops, I guess. And then what I want to point out in this photo is these little marks, like little footprints almost, of these little squared off recesses. These appear to be how stone was chipped away. I don't know. I'm going to have to say that's how this was done, and that those marks are for levering wood or metal wedges in there to break away the stone. That's just traditionally what they've always been called. I can't see them being any other thing, but I'm curious about the way that they were done, the way they were executed. Some of these here, like this is the seam of the rock, and then just a few inches over, this is a series of those wedge holes, like up at the top. That's this row here. So, early investigation. I don't know what I'm proposing. It's odd that these little pieces are still here, and how each one has almost an identical wedge hole breaking point, whatever you want to call that. Very interesting stuff. We can start proposing some of this other weathering, potentially being wedge holes maybe. See, here's another row. The one above in that quarry was at Aswan. Here again, Khafre pyramid. More than likely, Aswan was where these were made. So are these quarry marks from the original builders at Aswan, which is what I have to assume at this point. Not sure though. This stuff is still very in progress, I admit. Right here, this was one I want to point out. Why is this one underneath all this rubble here, up here, high up on the pyramid? Why was someone trying to cut up this block? And when did they try to cut up this block? Was this during the dismantling of the other casing stones? Wouldn't they have just done this down on the ground? And I don't think this was ever put back up because of the erosion on top. I'm very confused by that configuration. Another spot and a really grainy photo, but look how precise. There's like a groove and then the series of holes. And for just crude stonemasons from the Egyptian dynasties, would they go through all this trouble to create their wedge holes? This seems more like a high precision job here. I don't know how to explain it other than that. Here's a really good example of these squared off elements here. Very interesting. I don't know what that's about either. Other ones here. It's interesting how it kind of has a depression there. I'm not sure what that's about. And more here. So just something to look at. You all can give me feedback on these. I really don't know what I'm looking at half the time, other than what they tell me they are. This is interesting because why one row going this way? I can see they were going to break this off, but then what was going on down here? What was this going to be? Were they just going to cut off this little bit? Or was this, I mean, look how, were they following a crack? And then were they hoping that this was going to meet up and break along? I really don't know. This confuses me. This is a very puzzling picture. And before I forget, I want to mention Sylvie at New Earth. She has 2 really good new videos out. One on the Cathars, which is very interesting. The first site that she shows is a bevel block site. So I don't know what's the connection is with the Cathars, but she shows a map that's very interesting about the Paulsians and some others that are migrating from east to west over North Italy and Greece into Spain and France. It's very interesting, the migration route. It kind of follows some of the bevel block sites. So we may need to look into that a little bit deeper. Also, the double-headed eagle video. That's pretty interesting. I didn't know that one of the Incan gods, Maru, M-A-R-U, that is a double-headed winged serpent god. I didn't know it was double-headed. That was interesting. And there's a lot of double-headed bird and serpent symbolism throughout history. So that's just a really interesting video to watch. And finally, you guys know I like to try to use the correct terminology for things. Well, I found a couple of fun videos here by Shadiversity about the matriculations. Now, these are the little pieces above the castles that we've been talking about. Now we have the accurate, correct name for them. And it's a fun little video, tells you a little bit about them and shows some interesting examples. So you might want to check those out. I'll have a link in the description for all of these channels. Okay, let's begin. Now, I want to begin with some of the more familiar boxes, and I figure the best one to start with is the one that's been discovered most recently, the one at Alexandria. Now, this box has a very unique shape, and I'm going to point out the shapes of all these boxes because a lot of them are very unique. Some of them only one example of that style exists, so I'm going to try to be as detailed as I can, and we're going to try to make some connections between some different boxes. And this first set I'm going to designate as the faceted lid boxes with the rounded head portion. Some of them may taper to a narrower foot portion, other ones are just square, but it's a very unique style, and we're going to try to organize all these together. With this one, we know, you can read up on it, 3 skeletons were found inside of it, and they believe that this one dates to the Ptolemaic period because the other ones of this shape also date to the Ptolemaic period. But we're going to see some interesting contradictions in some of the dates, and we're going to have to reconcile that one way or the other. Now, since this one isn't inscribed, we don't have a direct written record of who this belonged to or when it was made. Now, the only things that we have gathered from this is the inhabitants and a small statue, a bust, but the head is completely obliterated, and a few gold trinkets, I believe. So I'm not exactly sure if who they found inside of this box. I'm not sure if those are the original people for this box. I want to assume that this was a reused sarcophagus. And if it was originally a sarcophagus, that's something else we have to propose. Now, to start out with, we're going to look at these kind of like we look at the bevel block sites. We're going to look for anomalies. Maybe some of you guys see it right away. Square indentation. It's got water in it because I guess they use some water to wash it off. And there are other little anomalies in this thing and in some of the other ones. And it's not just damage. Some of it looks like processing marks. This one centered in the lower portion of the lid, perhaps to assist in opening and closing it. This photo is not my photo. I didn't do this comparison, but it does point out something very interesting, doesn't it? I don't know if they intended it to be or not. They didn't circle this, but I see a square indentation here, maybe a smaller one there, maybe other ones in the lid. Down here where it's still covered up, perhaps there's some other little square recesses, imprints. And then, of course, what they're implying here is a connection to the sarcophagi boxes at Saqqara. That's what this is. And I've asked people about these before in comments. I haven't really got a good answer other than these must have been how the boxes were opened and closed. Maybe with the use of some kind of jack or a lift. I'm not really sure the configuration, but why else would there be 2 square cutouts in these lids? And I believe most of, if not all of, the boxes in the sarcophagi have them. I'd have to get someone like Ben or Luke to confirm because they've actually been there. But that is a very interesting execution for these. I believe only the sarcophagi lids have these cutouts in this configuration. There may be others in the museums, but I'm not 100% on that. And of course, I'm not going to include the sarcophagi boxes in this first list because those are of a different shape. The boxes are completely square, as are the lids. There is none of this rounding at the top or any of this tapering going on. I believe all these are just prisms, basically, square prisms. Now they've taken the lid out, that we can see here, and I've cropped his head out just in case he doesn't want to be photographed or broadcast. But here they've obviously had to have a winch and a crane to take this thing out of here. So the lid has been removed, but I have not found any photos that show that the box has been removed from the hole. I assume to this day the box is still in the pit. I don't know if they've taken it out. It looks to be intact, like they could take it out in one piece, but maybe they're still worried about it damaging it, maybe taking it out, so they're waiting. Not sure, but it's very interesting that it's still in the ground in all the pictures, and there hasn't been an update yet of it washed off and sat down in the parking lot or anywhere. Haven't seen any of those pictures. Haven't even seen any photos of the lid laying up in the parking lot or anywhere else either. So don't know what's going on currently with the box. Now, I'm definitely going to recommend you guys go watch Ancient Architect's video on the Alexandria sarcophagus, and he makes a connection to two other boxes that are basically identical in shape, but I have found at least two more. So we're going to look at those examples and compare those to the ones that Ancient Architects found. So definitely check out his video also. So I really don't think anyone's taken the time to actually find all of these. The ones I found have just been over the past couple weeks, but maybe there's some more that are undocumented or hidden away in a museum somewhere. I don't know. It's hard to find the pictures, and sometimes you stumble across new ones looking for other ones. It's very funny how the Google algorithm works. But one of the ones that Matt mentions in his video is the Weresh Nefer sarcophagus. Now this one is the cleanest example. This one supposedly belongs to the 30th dynasty, and it's Ptolemaic, 380 to 300 BC. It was found in Saqqara, and it is made out of granodiorite, and it supposedly belongs to Weresh Nefer, who was the priest of the goddess Mut, Nephthys, Sekhmet, Neith, and Satis. Now, this one has a very interesting lid. It's very intricately inscribed. The whole thing is. The motif here, sorry to zoom in so fast, the motif here on the back of the lid, this specific motif appears again on the back of the lower part of the box on another example. So keep this one in mind, the double boat with the two figures elevating the third figure. We'll look at that later. Also, I'll zoom in again here. This figure arching over, that's a familiar Egyptian motif as well. Chuck over at CFAP 7865 could give you a little more information on some of the motifs. Definitely a damaged portion here that has been patched, so they use a dark concrete or dark cement. Almost matches, no grain obviously, but fills it in. Probably we'll be able to see what was missing from this in the other example. So a very well done box, very lavishly inscribed, and I don't see many anomalies like square holes or indentations in this one. It seems like a pretty clean example. The only damage appears to be around the bottom edge where they've pried it open, and then along the bottom of the box where they've slid it around. Other than that, the box seems to be pretty pristine. There does seem to be maybe some indentations in some areas that are really shallow, but unless I have good quality photos of those, which I can't find, I'm not going to propose anything about those. Next, the sarcophagus of Wenefer, and already the names sound pretty familiar, Weresh Nefer and Wenefer, and this box also very similar in execution, except this one's a little bit shorter. When we look at it from above, you'll see it's a very squat box. Now, the motif on the lid is unique and is connected in another example. We'll look at that in a minute as well. But first, let's look at some of the anomalous stuff on this one, right? First of all, there's this darker patch of stone here. Whatever happened here is this I don't even know. Is this some kind of different portion of the rock? And then of course the grain. The grain is interesting to me. That's indicative that this was rock and not cast, like some people might propose. If it has a grain to it, I'm going to have to assume it was carved out from bedrock. Now it does have little indentations in it. Some of this stuff does look kind of weird. And this square portion, this sticks out. Let's zoom in here. This is a very interesting piece. Why did they leave this like this? This sticks out. This isn't damage into a finished box. This is a portion like a knob that stuck out. Very interesting. And some of this other damage, I'm not sure if I want to consider that square. Some of this damage on the corner, I don't know what to think about that either, except that some of the hieroglyphics go into the damage. Do you notice that? I'm going to point that out in a few other boxes as well, where what came first, the damage or the inscribing? We're going to pay very close attention to that. And now you can see that the lid is a little bit more of a brown stone, whereas the other one, the base was more of a granite, dark black granite. Is this also granite? It's labeled as granite or granodiorite. You can see a faint trace of a grain running down it. So I'm going to have to say again that this was a stone that was carved and not cast. Now a little bit about who Wenifer was. Wenifer was the high priest of Osiris at Abydos, which I'm going to have to assume that's where this one was found. And he was the priest under Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty. But I've also found information that says this belonged to the 30th or the second Persian period. So I'm not sure which one that is. If you look up this box, the Wenifer sarcophagus, you will find both. So I'm not sure. You guys tell me. To whom does this belong? Now, you'll look at the lid. You'll see a lot of damage. I think this damage definitely happened later, much, much later. You can see there are no inscriptions inside of there. They weren't even going to try to inscribe in there. So you would think that there was more inscriptions before this. They didn't try to go around them. But then here you see these are inscribed into the damage. So this damage is much older, we'll say, than this damage. So this was probably done trying to get the lid off. This was done much earlier and before the box was inscribed. And you'll see over here in the bird motif as well, look very close at these vertical striations. They go down into the damage. So the box was pitted before it was inscribed. That is very, very important to point out. Again, here you follow all the lines. All the lines fill in the holes. They go through the damage. Very important to point out. Now, there's one portion here. Obviously, the inscriptions go into this. But what is this? I think I'm going to call this a scoop mark. And I'm going to add that as a scoop mark. That's very interesting. And perhaps this piece over here. Perhaps there's nothing inscribed in it. Maybe another angle would show it. Not sure about that. Maybe they just decided to go around that. If we could have Mohammed Ibrahim read this for us, maybe he could tell us that they stopped here and then continued down here. That would be very interesting, right? So, some very interesting chronology when it comes to the damage and the inscriptions. Even down here at the bottom, the inscription goes on into this damage into the bottom here. Very faint, but you can see it. And just so I'm not telling you guys wrong, this is the Wikipedia article under Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty. And then the Met, they have it as Dynasty 30, second Persian period. So you guys tell me. I'm not sure. Not much information outside of these two pages. Next, this is one of the ones I found on my own. This is Jefapemu with a DJ, and he was the royal audit officer, 746 or between 746 and 332 BC. I know that sounds like a long range, but that's what they say, 746 to 332 BC. And I haven't found any pictures of the actual box for this one, so if anybody comes across the pictures of the box, could you please pass those along? I'd like to see those. So right away, what do we see on this one, other than the connection to the Wenifer box? Look at the inscription. Goes into the damage. So, like Matt proposes, or at least like he brings up in his video, later inscriptions on older boxes, reclaiming, reusing the older boxes. And he points out the Serapeum example where there's hieroglyphics scrawled into one of those precision boxes. That work isn't even as good as this work. Some of this stuff is very good, especially the birds on both, even though they do look like they go into the damage, and I'm going to have to assume that they were done later. The artist still very, very talented. They could do this kind of work. Next, another one that I found that no one has seemed to mention so far. This one belongs to General Petty Isset, and some sites have different names, different configurations of that name. So PEDI space ISET is how I found it. And I'm not sure about the time period on this guy or anything more about him. I tried to search for this general. A general seems like he would have a lot written down about him. There's a lot on this box, but I can't find an article. So if someone comes across an article on this general and can pass it along, I'd like to read about this person's history. So very few pictures of this box exist. Some of them are miscategorized, so it was hard to differentiate here, especially the fact that a lot of these look the same too. I can understand. This was the one I was mentioning where the foot portion here on the box has the same double boat motif like the other one, the Nefer one, has up here on the lid. And this pretty clear depiction here shows what's going on. Two boats, two people, and a third person that they are elevating. You see the gates. I think this is the part that was obscured, was both boats appear to be almost identical. The heralds here may be different, but these mesh gates and these other gates, and let's point these gates out. These gates are a very specific shape, and I think they correspond to some of these other lids we're going to see in a little bit. Now, I highly recommend Chuck and Sacred Geometry Decoded for discussing the motifs and their meanings, and maybe we can discover some interesting insights about the boxes and their secondary inhabitants by the inscriptions, and maybe perhaps something about the original inhabitants. I don't know. We'll have to ask them, see what they make of them. I admit I'm not very knowledgeable in some of these motifs, but this one on this lid is unique to all of them. It has a woman holding aloft either the sun or the moon with a figure in the other, and this is the only picture I've been able to find of the lid. So if anybody has any more pictures of the lid or any information on the inscriptions, I would like to know. I would like to point out on this one that it has a grain to it, and this grain looks similar to some of the Serapeum boxes. It's like a reddish, rusty looking grain. So I'm gonna have to say again that these are stone boxes that have been carved out. They're not cast. And in like the other examples where the lids don't match the boxes, even though I'm gonna have to assume that those went together because of their dimensions. If the dimensions line up and the level of finish is the same, I'm gonna have to assume that they did go together. And we're gonna see some other examples later on where perhaps the lid does not match the box. And then finally, let's point out a really famous example. How about this one? This one is the one at the bottom of the Osiris shaft. And I'm going to have to include this one, even though I haven't seen that many photos of it. It may be longer than the other examples. It may resemble the Serapeum boxes a little bit more. but because it has a rounded head portion and perhaps it tapers toward the feet, I'm going to have to assume that that is a similar execution as the one from Alexandria and the other ones we've seen. The portion here that's crude or broken away maybe they had a smoother finished profile that matched this portion, but it has broken away. Very hard to find any good photos of this, and our best friend Zahi Hawass here to show it to us. And I've also found other remnants of lids, perhaps to similar boxes. I'm not sure to whom these are attributed. They're just in an open air museum with no depiction, no description on the picture. These look crude, but they look like maybe they are a legacy of the older boxes, or maybe these are unfinished broken pieces that were inscribed upon and reused. I'm not sure. This could be one lid, the upper half and the lower half, and perhaps it was just an original box lid that was left in a cruder stage of the processing, abandoned, and then later people's carved into it. Or it could be a legacy. I'm not sure. Either way there, I'm not sure. The box in the background here, this could go along with it. It looks a lot more fragile, a lot thinner, a lot smaller. This is a very robust lid though, still like the others. So I'm not sure if these go together. And then to close out this section, we're going to include this one because this one is completely unique and I have no other category to place this one in. But how about this one? The sarcophagus of Ankh-Hor, high ancient Egyptian dignitary who officiated mainly under King Psammetichus II, Apries in the 26th dynasty. So that's interesting. We have a nice range going here from the 30th dynasty, all the way back. So some of them are uninscribed, some of them are inscribed. This one is very unique. This one, I've not seen any others like this one. And again, if this one is later inscribed, I could understand that. The depictions look pretty shallow. This is a pretty good photo. I'm going to have to assume here that these are later inscriptions and the box is much older. We don't have any damage that we could propose. Maybe the inscriptions went over in this example. The box looks pretty clean, even from all angles here. It looks like the box is in pretty good condition, so it would be hard to tell any areas where there was damage and the inscription done over it. But I'm going to have to, sorry, that was the previous one. This is actually how I found this one. But I'm going to have to assume that this is a later inscription in a much older box. And just so we can say we pointed them out, the knobs, obviously I'm going to have to assume these are for lifting. And the grain, again, very interesting, kind of a rusty grain all through the box and the lid. And if you'll notice, the grain almost continues exactly from box to lid, implying that this was the same piece of stone. The lid and the box were carved from the same piece of stone. And if you watch Brian Forrester's videos, you'll see that there are examples in the museums where they have obviously cut the lid from the bottom of the box. But in this scenario, this appears to be what the original unsculpted block was. They cut it into where it was supposed to have been cut and then shaped the lid and the box separately, putting them back together after they're finished. The other example appeared to be a rough box was created with the interior space created, and then they took the overly we'll say the bottom was overly thick, and they trimmed it down, and that trimmed piece they would then use for the top. And obviously those would have had to been perfect rectangles, none of this angling or faceting. So just to recap this section, and we'll probably We'll probably close it up after this. I want to show you all one more thing after this section that kind of doesn't fit in the other categories. But we'll close this section up here by saying 4 more examples of the Alexandria sarcophagus. We have the Werejnefer, Wenifer, the Chifapamu, and the General Petty Iset. Interesting how some of the motifs connect. So what does this imply? I don't know, but I'm going to have to assume at this point that these boxes have been reused by the Egyptians and that they are older, and the reason why the Alexandria box does not have an inscription is because maybe it was not found by the ancient Egyptians, and later peoples found it, and they chose to use it and chose not to inscribe it. So one more thing to close up today, guys. I want to show you this because I've been talking about this with a few people in the comments and in my Google Plus album, and I really want to get this connection proposed because I want to talk about it with you guys because I've never heard anyone else talk about these or make this proposal before. So these are in Egypt, and I'm not sure the exact location. I believe they are in the Fayum region, or they might be in the Saqqara region. Hard to find out. This is one of the only photos I found of these. But these lids are very, very unique. I have not seen these anywhere else in Egypt. They are faceted, but they also have 4 square protrusions, and then what also appears to be 4 nubs, 2 on either end for lifting. And in this example, these 4 protrusions don't appear to aid in the lifting, if that's what these are for. They don't appear to have aided with that. Maybe there was more that stuck out that has broken off. But the only way to open these appears to be with the nubs on the end, and I'm just going to have to assume that these are for strength. These little buttresses are for strength and decoration. That's the only thing I can assume. But let's look at somewhere else that has almost identical lids. So maybe some of you have seen this photo before and couldn't really quite place it. That was how I was. I had seen this before, and I said, where was that? I really can't remember. I know there's a very eerie similarity between these, but how close are these? And then I looked it up, and it's Japan. These are in Japan. They are almost identical. Now, I'll admit that they have extra facets on the ends and also extra nubs on the ends, and that these stick out. But I'm gonna have to say these are how the box was lifted, and these other ones maybe just decorative or for bolstering the lid. Obviously, they needed to put it a little bit further because it broke. But so, what does this imply? Does this imply some kind of legacy? The same culture? I don't know. They're not quite the same, I will admit. This one is much more precision carved, machined. I don't know. This is very old. Asuka, Japan, the Nara prefecture of Kansai. It's very hard to find photos of these and very hard to find information on these, but they also are connected to some of these giant megalithic structures. So we're going to see another example here where we have another lid like this one, but extremely eroded. This one, now I believe this one is inside of that megalithic structure we just saw, and it has some really interesting architecture in here. Hard to find photos again, but now look at this lid. This lid has the 4 protrusions. Maybe it did not have 2 on the ends, but maybe they've broken off, and it appears to be the same faceted shape. Now it's a much softer stone, and it eroded. Obviously the structure wasn't as protective of it, so water, rain over time dripped in and eroded it. Maybe it was a lot better in the past. I'm not sure about the damage. The only thing I can assume is for them to break into it, they did this because they couldn't get it off. They had to chisel away a portion to get inside of it. Interesting, maybe vertical striations in here. I don't know if that's staining or processing marks. It's an okay photo, but it still doesn't show too much detail. But some interesting things going on with these boxes for sure. And then here, one of the only other angles I could find, it's inside this huge megalithic tomb, whatever you call this. And I'm not sure if they know who was supposed to go in here. I'm not sure if any remains or artifacts were found. Hard to find any information. If any of you guys know, please pass that along. So, very interesting boxes and very interesting, perhaps, connection across, vast distances here. And even in this picture, you might even be able to see some of this vertical stuff, the striations. Is this etchings into it? Is this just streaks from drips of water? I'm not sure. I want to see really good photos of that. Those could be processing marks, right? So I think we'll close it up there, guys. We still have a lot more to talk about in Egypt and in other places. There's some other good photos. Man, I wish that was just a bigger photo so I could see more of that. And, some of these other photos as well. But a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more interesting sarcophagi in other areas that show anomalies. So it looks like I've opened up Pandora's box with this one, but we'll keep going and see if we can find any interesting connections and just document all these, because I haven't seen anyone actually go through them all and attempt this before. So thank you all for hanging out with me, and we will talk to you next time.